One week after my mom's funeral, my brother slid a folder across the table and told me she'd left him everything, then called me a burden. I didn't argue. I asked one question, and the answer wasn't in our memories, it was in the records. My name is Ethan. I'm 38 years old and I live outside Columbus, Ohio. I work as a systems analyst for a mid-sized logistics company. Quiet job, steady paycheck. The kind of work where you solve problems all day and then go home wanting silence. If you met me in line at a grocery store, you'd probably guess I'm the responsible one. The guy who remembers passwords, shows up on time, pays his bills, and doesn't ask anyone for favors. And that's exactly why what happened after my mom died didn't just hurt. It warped something inside me. Because for the first time in my life, doing things the right way wasn't enough. Not when my own brother decided that grief was the perfect moment to rewrite the story of who I was to the family. To understand it, you need to know what my family looked like on the outside versus what it felt like from the inside. We were the kind of family people described as close. That's the word neighbors used. Church friends used it. My mom's coworkers used it. My dad passed away when I was in my early 20s, and after that it was just mom, my older brother Caleb, and me. Caleb is 3 years older than me. He's charismatic in the way that fills a room. He can shake a hand, laugh at the right moment, tell a story with just enough self-deprecation to sound humble. He has always been good at reading people. And when you're good at reading people, you're also good at steering them. I was never that person. I didn't steer anyone. I just tried not to crash. Growing up, our roles were set early. Caleb was the one with the big plans, the one who had potential, the one who could do no wrong because even when he did wrong, he explained it in a way that made it sound like somebody else had created the circumstances. I was the one who needed to be practical, the one who should keep expectations realistic, the one my mom would sigh about like I was a math problem she couldn't solve. And I don't say that to villainize my mother. I loved her. She was gentle in 1,000 ways that mattered. She remembered birthdays, saved old drawings, knew the exact kind of soup that fixed a cold. She wasn't cruel, but she was also tired, widowed young, working too hard, trying to keep everything together with duct tape and prayer. And when you're tired, you lean on the kid who demands the least. That kid was me. When I turned 18, I didn't go find myself. I got a scholarship to a state school, studied hard, worked part-time, graduated and got hired. I moved into a small apartment, drove a reliable car, didn't call home asking for money, and slowly became someone who handled his own life. Caleb's version of adulthood looked different. He bounced between jobs, tried a couple of business ideas, had a few relationships that ended with dramatic speeches and sudden moves. Every time something collapsed, mom worried and compensated. She helped with rent just this once. She co-signed something because he's trying. She watched his dog when he just needed to clear his head. I watched all of it like someone looking through glass. I wasn't jealous of the help. I was jealous of the softness, the assumption that he deserved extra chances. Still, I kept showing up. Every Sunday call, every holiday visit, every small repair around mom's house, fixing her email, changing light fixtures, checking her smoke detectors. When mom started having health problems, I showed up even more. At first it was subtle. She'd forget words, lose her balance in the kitchen and laugh it off, get tired after small errands. Then it became appointments, cardiologist, neurologist, more blood tests than she ever wanted. And then eventually the word none of us wanted to hear, cancer. It wasn't the dramatic movie-style moment. There was no screaming or fainting. We were sitting in a quiet exam room with a doctor who had the expression of someone delivering a forecast. Mom nodded like she was absorbing data. Caleb asked a lot of questions with a concerned voice. I sat there with my hands folded so tightly my knuckles went pale, thinking, okay, what's the plan? What do we do first? The next months blurred into a routine that rewired my entire life. I adjusted my work schedule. I learned which hospital parking garages were cheapest. I knew the cafeteria's hours. I learned to read mom's face to tell the difference between I'm tired and I'm scared. Caleb did what Caleb did. He appeared in the most visible moments. He brought flowers. He posted a photo with mom and wrote paragraphs about family and strength. He cried in front of people. He sat by her bed when relatives visited. And when nobody was watching, he was overwhelmed. He had to step out. He had to go handle something. He couldn't take off work again. His girlfriend was not okay with him being gone so much. He needed a break. I'm not saying he didn't love her. I'm saying love wasn't the same thing as responsibility. The responsibility landed on me, because it always did. I was the one sitting with Mom when she couldn't sleep, while the monitor beeped and the room smelled like antiseptic. I was the one driving her home after chemo when she couldn't lift her head. I was the one keeping a spreadsheet of medications because if you gave Mom the wrong pill at the wrong time, it wasn't a mistake you could undo. And through all of that, I kept hearing this quiet narrative from Caleb, sometimes directly, sometimes through the way he spoke around other people. Ethan's always been the stable one. Ethan doesn't have kids, so he has more time. Ethan doesn't really have a social life. Ethan's good at that kind of thing. It sounds harmless until you realize what it does. It turns care into a personality trait instead of a choice. It turns sacrifice into something you owe because you're better suited for it. It also sets the stage for something else. The idea that if you're the stable one, you don't need anything. Not credit, not gratitude, not protection. You can absorb the blows. Mom tried, in her way, to acknowledge me. She'd squeeze my hand after a long appointment and whisper, "I don't know what I'd do without you." And those moments mattered to me more than I can explain. They were small, but they were real. The last few weeks of Mom's life were mostly in the hospital. She'd been admitted after an infection that turned into complications. The medical team was kind but blunt. There were words like declining, and comfort, and prepare. Caleb showed up a lot during those weeks, more than he had before. Not consistently, but often enough that he looked like the devoted son to anyone walking past the room. I didn't question it. If anything, I was grateful, not because I trusted him, but because I was exhausted and I wanted to believe we were going to do this together. The day Mom died was strangely quiet. She went in the early morning. No dramatic last words, no sudden rally. Just a slow fade that ended with a nurse checking her pulse and then looking at me with an expression that said everything without saying anything. I remember thinking, this is it. The thing you fear your whole life, and then it happens in a room with beige walls and a rolling IV stand. Caleb arrived about 40 minutes later. He hugged me tightly. He cried loudly. He kissed Mom's forehead and told her he loved her like he was trying to project the words into the ceiling. I cried too, but mine was silent. Mine was the kind of cry that feels like your chest is collapsing inward, like there isn't enough oxygen in the room. The funeral came together fast. Relatives flew in. People brought casseroles. The same comforting phrases repeated so many times they became background noise. She's in a better place. She's not suffering. She lived a good life. Caleb gave a eulogy that made people sob. He talked about Mom's kindness, her strength, her sacrifices. He talked about family like it was a sacred vow. People came up to him afterward and said he was so strong. They hugged him and called him a good son. I stood near the side, accepting condolences, shaking hands, offering polite thank yous like I was a co-worker at my own mother's memorial. And I would have let all of that go. I could have swallowed the unfairness because grief makes you tired, and tired people choose the path of least resistance. But then the practical pieces started. The parts that happen after the flowers die, closing accounts, sorting personal items, canceling utilities, talking to the funeral home, finding paperwork, trying to keep your mother's whole life from becoming a pile of documents on a dining room table. That's where the life insurance came in. My mom wasn't rich. There was no sprawling estate, no hidden fortune, but she had a life insurance policy through her work, something she'd kept for years, a responsible adult thing she did because she wanted her kids protected if something happened. I knew about it because I'd helped her update her password for the employee portal a couple of years earlier. I didn't know the details. I never asked. It felt gross to ask. But a week after the funeral, Caleb invited me over to his place. He said we should talk through the financial stuff like adults. His apartment was too clean, staged almost. He'd put out bottled water and had a folder on the table like he was hosting a meeting. He didn't waste time. He told me Mom had left everything to him. Not in a will. Mom didn't have a will, but in general. He said she'd made her intentions clear. He said he was the beneficiary on the life insurance policy. Then he leaned back and looked at me with a practiced expression, sympathy blended with authority. He said, "I know you might feel entitled to some of it, Ethan, but Mom wanted me to handle things, and honestly, you've been a burden on this family for years." A burden. I stared at him, waiting for the rest, like maybe he'd realize how cruel that sounded and correct himself. He didn't. He continued, voice calm, like he was explaining a budget. He reminded me of the times Mom had worried about me, times I'd been quiet, times I'd been distant. He framed my independence like abandonment. He said, "You show up when it's convenient, but you were never really here." I felt something cold and sharp in my stomach, Because I could still see the hospital room at 2 a.m. I could still feel the steering wheel under my hands as I drove Mom home after chemo. I could still picture the medication chart I'd taped to her fridge. And he was sitting across from me, in a clean apartment, telling me I was a burden. I didn't yell. I didn't slam a fist on the table. I did what I've always done when someone tries to rewrite reality in front of my face. I got very still. I asked him carefully, "Did you see the beneficiary form?" Caleb smiled like I was a kid asking how taxes worked. He said, "That's not how it works. I'm the beneficiary. Mom updated it. The insurer already confirmed." I asked, "When did she update it?" He shrugged. "Recently, when things got serious." I asked, "Did she tell you she changed it?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping into something more intimate and venomous. He said, "She didn't have to tell you. You and Mom weren't close like that." And that was the moment I realized what he was doing. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. If he could make the family believe Mom chose him officially, legally, financially, then he didn't just get the payout, he got the final word on who mattered. He got the authority to decide what kind of son I had been. And if I argued, I'd look exactly like what he was painting me as: greedy, resentful, the burden trying to grab something at the end. So I didn't argue. I left his apartment and drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers hurt. That night I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a legal pad in front of me. I wrote down what I knew. Mom had a policy. Caleb claimed he was the sole beneficiary. He said Mom updated it recently. Mom had been in and out of the hospital. There would be paperwork. There would always be paperwork. And then I wrote one more thing, slower, like a promise to myself. Don't fight the story. Get the documents. Because I've learned something over the years working in IT. People can argue all day about what they remember, but systems record what happened. Dates, times, submissions, notes, signatures, who did what, and when. If Caleb was telling the truth, the records would prove it. And if he wasn't, then the truth wouldn't come from my mouth. It would come from paper. The next morning, I called the life insurance company. Not in a dramatic way. No shaking voice. No threats. Just a calm, careful call during my first coffee, like I was canceling a gym membership. After 3 menu options and 2 minutes of hold music, a woman picked up and introduced herself as Marlene. I told her my name, my mother's name, and that she had passed away. I expected the usual condolences, and I got them. Soft, practiced, sincere enough. Then I said, "I'm trying to understand the beneficiary designation on her policy. My brother says he's the sole beneficiary. I'm not disputing anything yet. I just want to request a copy of the most recent beneficiary change form, including the signature page, submission method, and the date it was received." There was a pause. Not a suspicious pause. More like a pause where someone's brain switches from bereavement call to potential compliance request. Marlene asked if I was the executor. I swallowed. Mom didn't have a will. No named executor. No neat folder labeled important documents like you see in advice columns. "I'm not," I said. "There isn't an executor. I'm her son. I'm requesting a copy for my records." She explained politely that beneficiary information is typically disclosed only to the beneficiary after a claim is filed, or to authorized parties. Then she added a line that stuck with me. "However, if you believe there may be an issue with the beneficiary designation, you can submit a written request for a review." A review. That word felt like a door cracking open. I asked what a review involved. She said it usually began with a written statement and a request for documentation. If the policyholder's signature or intent was in question, they would escalate it to the claims investigation team. They could also place a temporary hold if there was a credible dispute, especially if fraud or coercion was alleged. Fraud. Coercion. I didn't say those words. Not yet. I wasn't going to make accusations without facts. I said, "Can you tell me what documents I can request as next of kin, even if it's limited?" Marlene gave me an address for their claims department and an email for submitting a written inquiry. She also told me exactly what to include: my ID, Mom's death certificate, proof of relationship, and a clear list of what I was requesting. Before we ended the call, she said, "I can't promise what we can release, but if there were changes made recently, those changes would have records attached." Records attached. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, staring at my blank legal pad. Then I wrote down a checklist, like I was troubleshooting a broken server. 1. Get death certificates. 2. Gather proof of relationship birth certificate. 3. Gather policy info, account number. 4. write a formal request, beneficiary form copy plus signature plus submission method plus receive date plus processing notes. And then I did the thing Caleb didn't expect me to do. I made it boring. Procedural, documented, patient. That same day, I stopped by my mom's house. Walking into it felt like stepping into a place where time had stopped, but the air didn't know it yet. Her jacket still hung by the door. Her shoes were neatly lined up. A calendar was still open to the month she died, with her handwriting on the days she had appointments. The kitchen smelled faintly like dish soap and old coffee. I stood there longer than I meant to, because grief isn't just sadness, it's disorientation. It's your brain rejecting what your eyes are seeing. Then I moved. I started looking for paperwork, not rummaging, not tearing things apart, just opening drawers the way I'd helped Mom open them when she was alive. Careful, respectful, like the house was still hers. In her desk I found the usual adult clutter: warranty papers, tax folders, an envelope of old photos, a stack of medical bills with red stamps and insurance explanations that looked like they were written in a foreign language. In a file labeled work, there were pay stubs and benefit summaries. In one of them I saw it, the life insurance policy listed as a benefit, with an estimated amount. It wasn't millions, it wasn't a secret fortune, but it was enough to matter. Enough to change someone's life if they got it all. Enough to make someone greedy. I took pictures of the relevant documents with my phone and put everything back exactly where it was. If Caleb ever tried to accuse me of snooping, I wanted to be able to say I handled it like an adult. On the way out I noticed something else: Mom's mail stack. Among the sympathy cards and hospital bills, there was a letter from the insurer. It wasn't opened. My heart jumped like it had heard a noise in the dark. I picked it up and checked the date. It had been delivered 3 days ago, addressed to Mom's house, not to Caleb. The envelope wasn't marked confidential, but it was clearly related to the policy. I didn't open it. I know how that sounds, like I'm trying to make myself look noble. The truth is, I was afraid of what I'd find, and I also didn't want to give Caleb a single legitimate reason to accuse me of wrongdoing. So I put the letter back where it was, took a photo of the envelope front with the date visible, and left. That evening, Caleb called me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask if I needed anything. He went straight to control. "So," he said, "have you accepted it yet?" "Accepted what?" I asked. "That Mom chose me," he said, like it was obvious. "You've been kind of quiet. I just don't want you doing something stupid, like calling the insurance company and making a scene." He said it so casually, like he was warning me not to wear socks with sandals. My stomach tightened. He was anticipating my move, or maybe he was just projecting his own paranoia. Either way, it told me something important. He wasn't as confident as he pretended. I kept my voice flat. "I'm handling paperwork, that's all." He laughed softly. "Paperwork? Right. Just remember, Mom's policy is straightforward. The insurer already confirmed it to me. Don't embarrass yourself. Embarrass yourself." That phrase hit harder than the burden comment because it carried the real threat. Caleb didn't just want the money. He wanted me to look small while he got it. I said, "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I'm just making sure everything is correct." He exhaled like I was exhausting him. "Ethan, don't do this. Don't turn Mom's death into a fight because you're bitter." Then he ended the call before I could respond. I sat there with my phone still in my hand, listening to the silence afterward. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. If Caleb truly believed Mom had changed the beneficiary willingly, he wouldn't be scared of me calling the insurer. He'd want me to call. He'd want the company to tell me officially, so I'd shut up. Instead, he was trying to block me with shame. That was my confirmation that I needed to keep going. The next day, I requested multiple certified death certificates. I dug my birth certificate out of a storage bin. I scanned my driver's license. Then I wrote the letter. I didn't write it like an emotional son. I wrote it like a professional. I included my full name, address, phone number, and relationship to the deceased. I included Mom's policy number, her date of birth, and her date of death. I attached the documents, and then I listed my request in bullet points, minus a copy of the most recent beneficiary designation and any beneficiary change forms submitted within the last 24 months, the submission method for each beneficiary change, online portal, mailed form, fax, in-person delivery, etc., the date and time each form was received, and any internal processing notes associated with the change, any records indicating who delivered or submitted the form, if applicable, any records of verification calls. identity checks, or follow-up communications regarding the change. I read it twice before sending. It felt strange, asking for internal notes about your dead mother like you were auditing a transaction. But that was the point. If this was a transaction, then it would leave a trail. When I sent the email, I half expected to get a generic response telling me they couldn't release anything. Instead, 2 days later, I received a reply. The claims department thanked me, acknowledged the request, and said they were opening an inquiry. They also asked a question that made my throat go dry. Can you please clarify the nature of your concern regarding the beneficiary change? The nature of your concern. I stared at the screen for a long time. Because once you accuse someone, even indirectly, you can't unaccuse them, even if it's true, even if you're right, even if you have every reason. So I wrote back carefully. I am concerned that the most recent beneficiary change may not reflect the policyholder's intent, due to the timing of the change during a hospitalization and potential inconsistencies regarding submission and signature verification. I am requesting documentation to confirm the change was properly authorized. I didn't mention Caleb by name, but I knew in my bones that the moment those words entered a claims file, it became real. From that point on, the insurer wasn't just processing a payout. They were protecting themselves. Insurance companies don't care about family dynamics. They care about liability. They care about whether they're going to get sued. They care about whether they paid the wrong person. And if there was even a faint smell of improper documentation, they would slow everything down. That was both a relief and a terror. Because I wasn't just pushing against Caleb now. I was pushing against whatever had actually happened. While I waited, the family started circling. My Aunt Linda, Mom's older sister, called me one evening. She's the kind of woman who says she doesn't do drama while actively participating in it. She said, "Caleb told me you're upset about the insurance money." I kept my voice neutral. "I'm not upset. I'm making sure everything is correct." She made a small disapproving sound. "Honey, your mother was sick. She knew what she wanted. Caleb was always the one she worried about. You know that." There it was, the old narrative. Caleb was the priority. Caleb was the worry. Caleb needed protecting. I said, "If it's correct, the documents will confirm it. That's all." Linda sighed like I was being difficult. "Just don't drag this out. People are grieving." I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. People were grieving, but apparently it was fine for Caleb to call me a burden and claim the entire payout. Grief was only a shield when it protected him. After the call, I felt the pressure settle in. Not loud pressure. The worst kind. Social pressure. The kind that tells you you're selfish for wanting clarity. I understood why most people just give up in situations like this. Because even if you're right, you pay for it in reputation, in whispered conversations, in family group texts that suddenly go quiet when you respond. But I had something else driving me now besides the money. It was the fact that Caleb had used Mom's death as a stage to humiliate me. And if I let him get away with it, he'd do it again for the rest of my life. A week later, I received another email from the insurer. They said the inquiry was still in process. They also said they had placed a temporary hold on the claim while they reviewed documentation related to a recent beneficiary change. Temporary hold. My hands trembled slightly as I read that line. Caleb was not going to take that well. And sure enough, an hour later, he called me. Furious. He didn't say hello. "What did you do?" he snapped. I said, "What are you talking about?" "The insurance company," he hissed. "They said there's a hold because someone disputed the beneficiary change." "Was that you?" I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was scared, but because I was choosing my words like I was handling something explosive. "I requested the documentation," I said finally. "That's it." Caleb's voice went sharp. "You had no right." "I'm her son," I said. "I have a right to ask questions." He laughed, short, ugly. "Questions? Sure. You're trying to steal from me, Ethan. You always resented me. This is who you are." I could hear his breathing, fast and hard, like he was pacing. Then he said something that felt like a slip. "You think you can win because you have paperwork. You think some form matters more than what Mom wanted. Some form." That phrase landed wrong. Because if Mom had wanted him as the sole beneficiary, the form would match it. The form would be his best friend. So why was he dismissing it? I kept my tone steady. "If the form supports you, you'll get paid. If it doesn't, then we'll deal with that." He went quiet for half a second. Then he said, slower, like a warning, "You're making an enemy out of me." I almost told him, "You've been my enemy for years." But I didn't. I said, "I'm not making an enemy out of anyone. I'm asking for the records." Then I ended the call. Afterward, I sat in my car in my driveway, staring at the steering wheel again, the same way I had after leaving his apartment. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear, because in that moment, I stopped seeing Caleb as my brother. I saw him as a person who had made a plan, and now that plan was being forced into daylight. All I had to do was wait for the paper trail to arrive. Waiting turned out to be its own kind of torture. Not because I didn't have patience, but because every day that the insurer reviewed documentation, my family filled the silence with their own version of events. Caleb called relatives. I could tell because my phone started lighting up with numbers I hadn't seen in years. My cousin Rochelle texted, "Hey, I heard there's drama about your mom's policy. Are you okay?" My uncle Brent left a voicemail that began with, "I don't want to get involved," and then proceeded to get involved for 2 full minutes. The theme was always the same. "Why are you making this harder? Your mom wouldn't want this. Caleb deserves it. Caleb needs it." Caleb was there. I didn't defend myself. Not loudly. Not emotionally. I just kept saying one line, like a broken record. "I'm not fighting. I'm verifying." Most people didn't understand the difference. They thought verification was just a polite word for accusation. But in my head, the difference mattered. Because if I was wrong, if Mom had really changed it to Caleb, I could live with that. I could even live with the unfairness. What I couldn't live with was being gaslit while my mother was barely cold in the ground. A few days after the insurer placed the hold, I got a call from a number with an out-of-state area code. A man introduced himself as Daniel, part of the insurer's claims integrity unit. His voice was steady, professional, like someone who'd had this conversation 1,000 times. He said, "Mr. Walker, I'm calling to gather information related to the beneficiary change inquiry. This is a standard part of our process." Standard, sure. He asked a few baseline questions first. My relationship to my mother, whether I had power of attorney at any point, whether I had been involved in her finances. Then he asked, "Do you have reason to believe your mother was not of sound mind at the time of the beneficiary change?" I felt my throat tighten, because I didn't want to reduce my mother to a legal condition. She was still my mom. She wasn't a case, but I also couldn't pretend. "My mother was hospitalized during the last weeks," I said carefully. "There were periods where she was lucid, and periods where she was heavily medicated. I don't know the exact date of the change. That's why I requested the records." Daniel paused, typing. Then he asked the question that told me he'd already seen something. "Do you know if your brother had access to your mother's personal documents or identification during her hospitalization?" I stared at the wall above my kitchen sink, my mind replaying flashes. Caleb sitting by her bed with her purse on the chair next to him. Caleb saying he'd take care of her paperwork. Caleb offering to organize her stuff because I was too stressed. I hadn't thought of it as access. I'd thought of it as family. "I don't know," I said, and it was the truth. He visited often. He could have. Daniel didn't react. He just kept going. "Do you recall any discussions about changing beneficiaries? Any mention of the policy?" "No," I said. "Never." "Was there any conflict between you and your mother toward the end?" he asked. That one stung, because there's always conflict in families when someone is dying. Not screaming fights, but friction, misunderstandings, exhaustion. "We had normal stress," I said, "but I was the one taking her to appointments, managing meds. I was there." Daniel said, "Understood." Then he asked, "Do you have any documentation of your mother's condition during her hospitalization? Admission dates, treatment notes, anything that might clarify capacity?" I exhaled slowly. This was the part where my careful little verification mission turned into something real, something that required me to look at my mother's last days like evidence. "I can get her hospital admission and discharge dates," I said. "I can request records if needed." "I recommend you do," Daniel replied. "Specifically, we may need documentation around the date the beneficiary change was processed." Processed. That word hit me. Not signed, not requested, processed, meaning the insurer's system had already logged a timeline. I asked, "Can you tell me when the change was processed?" There was a pause, just long enough to remind me he had to follow rules. "I can't provide full details over the phone," he said, "but I can tell you it was within the last month of her life." My pulse thudded in my ears. Within the last month. That was the period when Mom's world had shrunk to a hospital bed, a rotating set of nurses, and a haze of pain management. I forced myself to keep my voice even. "Okay, what happens next?" Daniel explained the steps. They would request the original change request, verify signatures, verify delivery method, and review any internal notes. If inconsistencies existed, they would contact the listed beneficiary and potentially other parties. Other parties, meaning me, meaning Caleb, meaning possibly the hospital. He ended the call by saying, "We will also be sending you in writing what we can disclose regarding the beneficiary change documentation. Please watch for a packet by mail or secure email within 10 business days." A packet. So the signed form was real. It existed. It would arrive as paper, black ink, dates and timestamps. After I hung up, I just sat there, my hands flat on the table, like I needed the pressure to keep myself from floating away. Then I started moving again. I requested my mother's hospital records. That process alone was a labyrinth. Medical records departments don't treat grief like an emergency. They treat it like a request in a queue. I filled out forms, provided proof, signed releases. I asked specifically for admission and discharge dates, medication logs if available, and physician notes about mental status. When I hit submit, I felt sick, like I was betraying Mom by turning her last days into documents. But I kept reminding myself, Caleb already did worse. If he used her illness as a doorway to steal, then the only way to protect her dignity now was to expose it. While I waited for medical records, I went back to Mom's house and did something else. I made an inventory, not of her belongings, but of the timeline. I sat at her kitchen table with her calendar and my phone photos. I wrote down every appointment, every hospital admission, every date Caleb had visited that I could remember. I pulled up my call logs, text messages, anything that could anchor memory to something objective. On the day Mom was admitted the final time, I had texted Caleb, "She's being admitted. Can you come tonight?" He'd replied, "I'll try. Busy day." He showed up 2 days later. On the day she was transferred to ICU, I'd called him 3 times. He didn't answer until midnight, and then he acted offended that I sounded angry. The pattern wasn't just emotional, it was logistical. His presence was selective, and if there was a beneficiary change within the last month, I wanted to know exactly when he'd been there. A week into the hold, Caleb escalated. He showed up at my house on a Saturday afternoon. I saw his car through the blinds and felt a flare of dread. Not fear, exactly. More like the dread you feel when you know a storm is walking up your driveway in human form. I opened the door before he could knock, just to keep the spectacle from happening on my porch. He walked in like he owned the place. He didn't sit. He paced in my living room, running a hand through his hair, breathing like he'd jogged here. "You have any idea what you've done?" he said. I kept my voice low. I requested documentation. He pointed at me. "No, you accused me. You put a fraud flag on Mom's policy." "I didn't accuse you," I said. "I said the timing was concerning." "Because it is." Caleb laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think you're some kind of detective now? You think you're smarter than everyone because you're the stable one." I watched him pace, and for a moment I saw him as a kid again. Dramatic, restless, needing to be the center of the room. "I'm not trying to be smarter," I said. "I'm trying to be sure." Caleb stopped pacing and leaned toward me. His eyes were bright, almost feverish. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to call them back and tell them it's a misunderstanding. You're going to withdraw whatever you submitted. And you're going to stop poisoning the family against me." I felt my jaw tighten. "I'm not withdrawing anything." His face shifted, anger sliding into something colder. Then he said very quietly, "You're doing this because you want revenge." That word revenge made me almost smile, because it revealed his mindset. He couldn't imagine someone just wanting the truth. In his world, everything was power plays. "This isn't revenge," I said. "It's accountability." Caleb stared at me, then said, "Fine, let's do accountability. Where were you when Mom needed help paying bills before Dad died? Where were you when I was trying to start my business and you refused to invest? Where were you when—" "Stop," I said, sharper than I meant to. He froze. I took a breath and forced myself back into calm. "Don't rewrite history to justify what you're doing now." Caleb's nostrils flared. "What I'm doing now is protecting what Mom wanted." I looked him in the eye. "Then the paperwork will prove it." For a second, he didn't speak. His gaze flicked away, just slightly, and in that tiny movement I saw it, panic. Not full-blown, but a crack. He recovered quickly and snapped, "You always hide behind paperwork because you can't handle real life." Then he walked out, slamming my door hard enough that the frame rattled. I stood there in the silence afterward, heart pounding, and I realized how close we were to something irreversible. If Caleb was innocent, he'd be annoyed, defensive, hurt, but this was different. This was control slipping. This was a man watching his plan wobble. 2 days later, the hospital records arrived, partial but enough to matter. They included admission dates, major medication administrations, and physician notes about Mom's condition. I sat at my table and read through them slowly, line by line. There were notes like, patient drowsy, oriented X1, confused at times, receiving opioids for pain, family at bedside, family at bedside. I kept reading until my eyes caught on a date that made my stomach drop. A note from a social worker. Not medical jargon, plain language. It referenced a family member asking about documents and insurance forms while Mom was being assessed. It didn't say who, it didn't accuse, it just existed like a footprint. I read it 3 times, making sure I wasn't twisting it. Then I did what I'd been doing all along. I documented it. I highlighted the date. I scanned it. I saved it in a folder labeled Claim Inquiry. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was excited, because the closer I got to certainty, the uglier it felt. If Caleb had done what I suspected, then he hadn't just betrayed me. He'd exploited Mom when she was vulnerable, and then he'd stood in a funeral home and cried like the perfect son. 3 days later, the insurer packet arrived. It came in a plain envelope with the company logo in the corner, and my name printed cleanly across the front. For a moment, I just held it. It was heavier than I expected. More pages than a single form. My hands were sweating. I set it on the table and stared at it like it might move on its own, because I knew that whatever was inside would change the rest of my life with my family. If the documents showed Mom had willingly changed everything to Caleb, then I'd have to decide what kind of relationship I could have with a brother who'd still called me a burden afterward. And if the documents showed something else, something messy, inconsistent, impossible to explain, then I'd be staring at proof that my brother had crossed a line you don't come back from. I slid a finger under the flap. Then I stopped. I reached for my phone, not to call anyone, but to turn on the camera and record myself opening it. Date and time, unbroken. It felt paranoid, but I didn't care. If Caleb had been willing to manipulate the truth once, I wasn't giving him a second chance. I pressed record, took a breath, and opened the envelope. The first page was a cover letter from the Claims Integrity Unit, stating that due to an active inquiry, they were providing limited documentation for review. My eyes skimmed down until I saw the words that made my chest go tight. Enclosed beneficiary change request form. Copy, receipt log and processing notes. Processing notes, receipt log, and a copy of the form. I turned the page and my mouth went dry as I saw the header at the top of the next sheet. Beneficiary change request. My mother's name printed clearly, a date, and at the bottom of the page a signature that looked like my mom's, at least at first glance. But right beside it was something I hadn't expected to see. A section labeled Received By with a handwritten name, and a timestamp. I leaned closer, my heartbeat loud in my ears, as I tried to make sense of what I was looking at, because suddenly the question wasn't just whether the signature was real. It was who had brought this form in while my mother was in a hospital bed. I stared at that Received By line until the letters stopped looking like letters. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten in dark ink, the kind of pen pressure you use when you want something to be legible, when you know it might be looked at later. The name was there, clear enough that there was no room for interpretation. Caleb Walker, my brother's full name, written like a signature right next to a timestamp that put the submission squarely inside my mother's final hospitalization. For a few seconds, my brain tried to soften it. Maybe it meant he picked up paperwork from her employer. Maybe he dropped it off after she signed it. Maybe she asked him to help. All of those maybe thoughts came fast, like my mind was trying to protect itself from the simplest conclusion. Then I looked back up at the date on the form. It was a Tuesday. I knew it was a Tuesday because I remembered that week with horrible clarity. That was the week Mom was moved from the regular oncology floor to a step-down unit. That was the week her pain medication was adjusted twice because she couldn't stop shaking. That was the week she called me by my father's name once and then cried like she'd done something unforgivable. Caleb had visited that Tuesday. Not for long, just long enough to take pictures with her, long enough for a nurse to say, "Your son is here," and for Mom to nod like she understood. I lowered the page and forced myself to keep going through the packet. The next document was the receipt log. It looked like a system printout, transaction style. It listed minors, date received, method of submission, employee initials, status. The method line made my stomach twist again. In-person drop-off. In person. So it wasn't mailed. It wasn't faxed. It wasn't processed through an online portal with a login trail. Someone physically brought it to an office. Someone physically handed it over, and the log included one more detail, submitted by third party. Third party. That wasn't just a vague phrase. That was the company acknowledging the policyholder did not submit it personally. I flipped to the processing notes. These weren't dramatic. They were written like little fragments, the way employees leave internal comments to cover their own work. Form received, policyholder signature present. Attempted verification call, no answer. Second attempt, call answered by male voice. Stated policyholder unavailable. Advised policyholder must confirm. Caller insisted form sufficient. Escalated to supervisor. Supervisor approved exception due to medical hardship. My mouth went dry. Medical hardship. That wasn't a legal standard. It sounded like a human decision. A shortcut that someone took because a story was told convincingly enough. I read that section again. A male voice answered the verification call and said my mother was unavailable. Unavailable. In a hospital. While paperwork was being pushed through. I sat back in my chair and let the air out of my lungs slowly. My hands were cold now, not sweaty. Cold like my body had decided fear was no longer productive and switched to something else. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was a process that had been manipulated. And the most chilling part wasn't even Caleb's name on the received by line. It was the sentence, supervisor approved exception. Meaning, someone inside the insurer had allowed a beneficiary change without direct confirmation from the policyholder. The company was going to care about that. A lot. But my family was going to hear something simpler. Ethan is trying to take Caleb's money. I turned back to the beneficiary change form itself and studied the signature. At first glance it could pass as Mom's. The same slant, the same loop in the M. But the more I looked, the more it bothered me. It wasn't just that it might be forged. It looked rushed, like someone who knew the general shape of her signature but didn't have her rhythm. The line pressure was inconsistent. The letters looked copied rather than lived in. I grabbed a folder from my bag, a folder I'd started building without fully admitting why. Inside were copies of Mom's older documents, a hospital intake form from the previous year, a consent form, her driver's license renewal, real signatures done across time when she wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I laid them next to the insurance form, and the difference hit me like a slap. Mom's real signature had a natural drag at the end, like a sigh. This one ended abruptly, like a pen lifted too early. I wasn't a handwriting expert. I didn't need to be. I knew my mother's hand. I'd watched her sign birthday cards. I'd seen her write grocery lists. This didn't feel like her. I wanted to scream. Instead, I did what I'd promised myself from the start. I documented. I took clear photos of every page. I scanned the packet into a PDF. I saved it in multiple places. I emailed a copy to myself. I uploaded it to a secure drive. Then I called the claims integrity unit back. Daniel answered, and before I could even speak, he said, "Mr. Walker, I was going to reach out. I see the packet was delivered." "It was," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm for what I was holding. "Do you have questions?" he asked. I did. 1,000. But I started with the one that mattered. "The processing notes mention a verification call answered by a male voice," I said. "Do you have a record of what number was called and what number answered?" Daniel paused. "I can't disclose full call records, but I can tell you the call was placed to the policyholder's primary phone number on file. My mother's phone number. The one that usually sat on the tray table beside her hospital bed." I pictured Caleb picking it up. I pictured him standing near her, looking at her while she slept or drifted, and deciding that her voice wasn't needed anymore. I swallowed hard. "The notes also say an exception was approved due to medical hardship," I continued. "Is that normal?" Daniel's tone stayed professional, but it tightened slightly. "Exceptions can occur, not often, and they're evaluated. That is part of why we place the hold." "So you see an issue," I said. "I see a change that requires review," he replied carefully. He wasn't going to say the word fraud on a recorded line. "I also see a third-party submission during hospitalization and a lack of direct confirmation. Those factors increase the risk profile." Risk profile. That was his way of saying it smelled wrong. I asked him what my next step should be. He said, "At this point, we will likely request additional documentation. We may also ask the listed beneficiary, your brother, for an explanation of submission and any supporting evidence of policyholder intent." Supporting evidence. Caleb didn't have evidence. He had personality. And personality doesn't hold up against time-stamped logs. After I got off the phone, I did something I hadn't done since Mom died. I drove to her grave. It was a cold day, gray and flat. The cemetery looked like it was holding its breath. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and stared at her name carved into the stone like it was a mistake that hadn't been corrected yet. "I'm sorry," I said out loud, because there was no point pretending I could handle this silently anymore. "I'm sorry I'm dragging you into paperwork, but I don't know how else to protect what you meant." I didn't ask for guidance. I didn't ask for signs. I just stood there until my eyes burned and my throat felt raw, and then I went back to my car and made the next decision. I wasn't going to confront Caleb alone, not in my living room where he could twist words, not in a parking lot, not over the phone. I wanted witnesses, not because I wanted to embarrass him, because I didn't trust him to tell the truth when cornered. So I called Aunt Linda. She answered on the second ring, sounding brisk like always. "What now?" she said, half joking, half annoyed. "I need a family meeting," I told her. She sighed. "Ethan." "I'm not asking," I said, and surprised myself with how steady it came out. "I have documents from the insurer. I want you and Uncle Brent there. I want Caleb there, and I want it in a neutral place." There was a pause. "What kind of documents?" she asked, suddenly more cautious. "Beneficiary change form copy, receipt log, processing notes," I said. "It shows who submitted it. It shows the date. It shows inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies," she repeated like the word tasted bad. "I'm not going to argue over feelings," I said. "I'm going to show you what the insurer has in writing." Linda's voice dropped. "Are you accusing Caleb of something?" "I'm saying the paperwork doesn't match what he told everyone," I replied. "And if you're going to keep calling me selfish and bitter, then you can do it after you've seen the evidence." She didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "Fine. Sunday, after church, we'll meet at my place." "Good," I said. "I'll bring copies." When I hung up, my hands were shaking again. Not from fear of Caleb, from the sheer weight of what I was about to do. Because once you show a family evidence, you don't just expose the person who lied. You expose everyone who helped the lie survive. And I already knew what my family would do before they accepted the truth. They would search for a way to blame me. Sunday came faster than I wanted. I printed everything, multiple sets. I highlighted key lines. I put the pages in clear sleeves in a binder. Because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it clean. I arrived at Linda's house early. Uncle Brent was already there, sitting stiffly at the dining table like he'd been summoned to court. Linda set out coffee like it was a normal gathering, which made my stomach twist. There was nothing normal about what was coming. Then Caleb arrived. He walked in with that same controlled energy, dressed a little too nicely, like he'd prepared for optics. He looked at me and smiled, thin, confident. "Wow," he said, glancing at the binder. "You really went all in on this." I didn't respond. Linda forced a bright tone. "Let's all just talk calmly." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat, leaning back slightly like he had nothing to fear. "What's this about, Ethan?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, like he was performing reasonableness. "You've been dragging my name through the mud." I opened the binder and slid the first page across the table without saying a word. The cover letter, then the beneficiary change form, then the receipt log, then the processing notes. Caleb's eyes flicked over the pages fast, too fast for someone who was calmly hearing new information. His jaw tightened for half a second. Then he scoffed. "So what? Mom signed it. End of story." I pointed to the received by line and said, quietly, "Read that." Caleb glanced down. His face didn't change dramatically, but his pupils tightened, and for the first time since Mom died, he looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Linda leaned forward, squinting. Uncle Brent adjusted his glasses and stared. Linda read it out loud, slowly, like she couldn't believe the words were real. "Received by Caleb Walker." The room went silent. Caleb let out a short laugh. "Yeah, I turned it in. Mom asked me to. She was sick. She needed help." I nodded once, then explained the verification call. Caleb blinked. "What?" I turned to the processing notes and tapped the highlighted line. "Attempted verification call. Call answered by male voice. Stated policyholder unavailable. Caller insisted form sufficient." I looked directly at my brother. "That was you." Caleb's smile vanished. He leaned forward, anger flaring. "You don't know that." "It was her number," I said. "The insurer said they called the policyholder's primary number." Linda's coffee cup clinked softly as her hand trembled against the saucer. Uncle Brent cleared his throat like he was about to speak and then didn't. Caleb's voice rose. So what? She was asleep. She was medicated. She didn't want to be bothered with phone calls. I was helping her. That's all. I turned one more page and slid it toward Linda. A hospital record excerpt with the date circled. Family member asked about insurance forms, I said. During assessment. Linda's eyes widened as she read. Then she looked at Caleb, and something in her expression shifted from irritation at me to discomfort with him. Caleb noticed it too, and that's when he did what he always did when the room started turning against him. He tried to flip the narrative. He pointed at me and said, "This is what Ethan does. He documents. He builds cases. He turns family into enemies. He couldn't stand that Mom chose me, so he's trying to destroy me." I kept my voice steady. "I'm not destroying you, Caleb. I'm showing what the insurer wrote, in their system, with dates." Caleb's eyes flashed. "And what do you want? Half? Is that it?" I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer wasn't just a number. What I wanted was my mother's voice back in the process. What I wanted was for Caleb to stop using her death as a weapon. But I knew I couldn't say that and expect it to land. So I said the simplest truth. "I want the claim handled correctly," I replied, "based on verified authorization. If Mom truly changed it, it will hold up. If it doesn't, it won't." Caleb stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language, because to him, correctly was just a barrier. Linda finally spoke, voice quiet and strained. "Caleb," she said, "did your mother actually sign that form while she was in the hospital?" Caleb's mouth opened. And for the first time in my life, my brother hesitated, because whatever answer he gave next was going to decide whether this stayed a family argument or became something much bigger. Caleb's hesitation lasted maybe 2 seconds, but in that room it felt like a confession. He looked from Aunt Linda to Uncle Brent and then back to me, as if he was trying to calculate which version of the story would survive. Finally he said, "Yes, she signed it." Linda's voice stayed low. "Did she ask you to change it to only you?" Caleb's face tightened. "She wanted me to handle things. She didn't want Ethan stressed." I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just asked, "When?" Caleb snapped his eyes to me. "When it was obvious she wasn't getting better." "And where?" I asked. "In her hospital room," he said too quickly. "She told me she wanted it that way." Uncle Brent leaned back and exhaled like the air had turned heavy. Linda said, "Caleb, your mother was barely coherent some days." Caleb's voice rose. "She was coherent enough. She knew who I was. She knew what she wanted." I watched him talk, watched him push emotion into the room like smoke, because emotion was his best weapon. If he could make this about love and loyalty, he could bury dates and logs under a pile of feelings. So I didn't argue about love. I went back to the paperwork. "The insurer tried to verify," I said. "They didn't reach her. Someone answered her phone and said she was unavailable." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "So, she was asleep." Linda's jaw tightened. "Did you answer her phone, Caleb?" He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said, "I was there." That was his way of sliding around the truth without lying outright. I looked at Linda and Brent. This is why I asked for a meeting. He's not denying he submitted it. He's not denying he controlled access. And the insurer themselves flagged inconsistencies. Caleb scoffed. "Inconsistencies? You're acting like you're the police." "No," I said quietly. "I'm acting like a son who watched his mother fade, and then watched you turn her last month into a transaction." That landed. Not like a punch, like a weight. Linda's eyes shimmered, and for a moment I saw my mother in her face, the same tired sadness, the same hope that things could still be smoothed over. Linda said, "Caleb, if Mom wanted this, why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she tell Brent? Why didn't she tell Ethan?" Caleb's lips pressed into a line. "Because she didn't want drama." I leaned forward, and yet here we are. Silence again. Then Caleb did something I hadn't expected. He grabbed the beneficiary form and slapped it with his palm. "This is her signature," he said loud. "What else do you need? You're just trying to take what I'm owed." "Owed," I repeated. "For what?" He stared at me like I was stupid. "For being there," he said. "For being the one she worried about. For being the one who actually cared." I held his gaze. I cared. I just didn't perform it. That was the moment his control slipped completely. His face twisted. "You think you're better than me. You think because you're quiet, you're moral." I stayed calm, even though my chest was burning. "No, I think you're desperate. And I think you used Mom's condition to push paperwork through when she couldn't protect herself." Linda flinched at that, like the words hurt physically. Brent finally spoke, voice gravelly. "Caleb, did you fill the form out?" Caleb's head snapped to him. "I helped, Did you fill it out? Brent repeated. Caleb's jaw worked. Yes. Linda's voice cracked. Did she read it? Caleb threw his hands up. She didn't need to read it. She trusted me. She told me what she wanted. And she wanted Ethan to get nothing? Linda asked. Caleb's eyes flashed. She knew Ethan would be fine. There it was, the family's old excuse, said out loud like it was a moral argument. Ethan will be fine. So Ethan gets less. Ethan gets overlooked. Ethan gets used as the safety net. I felt something settle in me. Cold and final. I said, this meeting isn't to convince you. It's to make sure everyone understands what's happening. The insurer is reviewing this, not me. If they decide it's valid, you'll get paid. If they decide it's not, you won't. Caleb stared at me with pure hatred. You're going to ruin me. I didn't answer. Because the truth was, he'd already ruined himself the moment he chose to treat my mother like a signature instead of a person. I stood up, closed my binder, and looked at Linda and Brent. I'm not asking you to take sides, I said. I'm asking you to stop repeating Caleb's story as if it's fact. Wait for the outcome. Linda swallowed hard. Brent nodded once. Slowly. Caleb stood too, chair scraping. This isn't over, he hissed at me. I met his eyes. It's been over for a long time. We just finally have paperwork. I left before the argument could turn into something uglier. 2 weeks passed. 2 long, grinding weeks where every unknown number made my stomach drop. Where every family text felt like a trap. Where my grief, which had been muted by tasks, came roaring back at night when I lay in bed and couldn't distract myself. Then Daniel from Claims Integrity called again. Mr. Walker, he said, we've completed our review of the beneficiary change request. My heart hammered. Okay, he spoke carefully, like he had to keep his words within policy. We found the change request did not meet our authentication standards, he said. Specifically, direct confirmation from the policyholder was not obtained, and the documentation submitted was inconsistent with our requirements given the circumstances. I gripped the edge of my table. What does that mean? I asked, even though I knew. It means the beneficiary change will not be honored, he said. The policy will be processed under the prior beneficiary designation on file. The prior designation. My throat tightened. And what was that designation? A split beneficiary designation, he said. 2 primary beneficiaries. Me and Caleb. 50-50. It wasn't the money that hit me. It was the word split. It meant Mom hadn't tried to erase me. It meant the story Caleb told, that she'd chosen him and left me nothing, was just that, a story. Daniel continued. I also need to inform you that due to the inconsistencies, this matter may be referred to our internal fraud team for further review. You may be contacted for additional statements. Internal fraud team. A chill ran through me. What about Caleb? I asked. Daniel didn't answer directly. He couldn't. All parties involved may be contacted, he said. Our priority is to ensure correct disbursement and to address process concerns. Correct disbursement. That was the clean corporate way of saying, your brother's plan collapsed. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, trying to feel something simple like relief. But the feeling that came first was grief. Sharp and hot, because the whole mess had forced me to think about my mother's last days in a way I never wanted. Then, underneath that, came something steadier. Validation. Not from family, not from sympathy, from a system that didn't care about charisma or performance. A system that cared about records. I didn't call Caleb right away. I didn't want a victory lap. I didn't want to hear his voice. I called Linda. When she answered, I said, the insurer finished the review. Her voice went tense. And they rejected the change, I said. They're processing under the prior designation. Linda exhaled, and it sounded like a sob caught in her throat. So, you were on it? Yes, I said. She was quiet for a beat, then asked, what did Caleb say? I haven't told him yet, I replied. Linda's voice dropped. He's been telling everyone you're trying to steal. He said you were going to drag him into court. I didn't drag him anywhere, I said. He dragged himself. She didn't argue. She just said softly, I'm sorry, Ethan. It wasn't a full repair, but it was the first time anyone in my family had apologized to me since this started. I thanked her and ended the call. Caleb found out the next day. Not from me, from the insurer. He called me immediately, and I almost didn't pick up. But I did, because avoidance was what he counted on. He counted on me staying silent so he could keep writing the narrative. I answered, hello. He didn't scream this time. His voice was strained, shaky with rage held back. They denied it, he said. Yes, I replied. You did this, he spat. I let a small pause stretch out. No, I said finally. You did it. I just asked for the form. He made a sound like he wanted to shout but couldn't find a sentence that worked anymore. Then he said, So you're happy? You got your money. I closed my eyes. I didn't get anything, I said. Mom is still gone, and you still tried to erase me. His voice went hard. I didn't try to erase you. I tried to protect myself. There was the truth, finally. Not dressed up, not polished. Protect myself. I swallowed the bitterness in my throat. You could have protected yourself without lying, I said, without humiliating me, without using her hospitalization. He was silent. Then he said, quieter, almost pleading, You don't know how it felt, watching her die, feeling like I was failing. I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered him calling me a burden. I remembered him standing over paperwork while our mother was sedated. I remembered him answering her phone and telling the insurer she was unavailable. So I said, the only honest thing left. I do know how it felt, I told him. I was there, and if you needed help, you could have asked. You chose deception instead. Caleb's voice turned bitter. Fine. Enjoy your half. Then he hung up. After that, the money became what it should have been all along. Practical. I used part of it to cover the remaining medical bills and funeral costs that hadn't been fully settled. I paid off the small lingering debts Mom had carried quietly, the ones she never complained about. I put the rest into savings and a modest investment account, not because I suddenly became wealthy, but because I refused to let this whole ordeal end with impulsive emotion. Caleb, as far as I know, spent his portion quickly. That's the kind of person he is. If money arrives in his hands, it becomes proof that the universe owes him comfort. The fraud review did continue in the background. I provided a statement. I sent copies of documents. I answered questions when asked. I never pressed for his punishment. I didn't need to, because the real punishment for Caleb wasn't legal, it was social. Once the insurer's decision became known, the family couldn't hold on to the Ethan is greedy story anymore without ignoring facts. They didn't all apologize. Some avoided the topic. Some pretended they'd always been neutral. But the air changed. Caleb stopped being the golden son who could do no wrong. People started watching him more closely, listening a little less, trusting him a little slower, and he noticed. The last time I saw him in person was months later, when we met to finalize the sale of Mom's house. We stood in the empty living room, echoing with our footsteps. The walls were bare. The smell of her soap, her laundry detergent had faded. Caleb looked around like he was angry at the space for being real. He said without looking at me, You really couldn't let it go. I held my keys in my hand and stared at the empty mantel where Mom used to put family photos. I let a lot go, I said. That's why you thought you could do it. He didn't respond. We signed the remaining paperwork with the realtor and went our separate ways. On the drive home, I realized the real ending wasn't the insurer's decision. The real ending was that I finally stopped accepting a role my family assigned me. Not the burden, not the stable one who doesn't need anything, not the quiet son who absorbs the unfairness to keep everyone comfortable. My mother's death was painful enough. I wasn't going to let it be used as a weapon against me. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's not money reveals who people are, even though it does. The lesson is simpler. When someone tries to rewrite your reality, don't wrestle them in the mud of arguments and emotions. Step back, get the records, ask for dates, ask for signatures, ask for receipt logs, because feelings can be manipulated, but paper trails don't care who tells the best story.